Hi everyone, and welcome back to Exploring AWS. It is a beautiful, beautiful Monday morning, and so we decided to start it off the right way and record a video on AWS Lambda. Now, before we jump into exactly what Lambda is, I want you to imagine for a second that you have a chunk of code that you need to run on a server, right? Let's face it, code does not run on air. You don't write it down in a notebook and just throw it up in the air and it runs, right? That's not how things work in the world of IT. You need to run your code on something. And I want you to imagine that you need to run your code on a server and you go into AWS. What are some of the things that you would need to consider when lighting up an EC2 instance? Well, you'd need to consider disk. You'd need to consider operating system. You'd need to consider what kind of software are you going to run on that operating system. You'd need to think about the configuration, not just the configuration of the software, but also the configuration of the operating system. You need to consider things like networking. Is this going to be a forward-facing application? How is this going to be used? So at least half a dozen things or so you're going to have to think about when creating your EC2 instance. Now, in the Elastic Beanstalk world, if this was going to be a web application, we could just simply go in, we could turn up an EBS instance, and we could be happy. We could be off and going, right? We'd have our web app, it'd be forward-facing, we'd be done. We wouldn't have to worry about any of these things. Now, in the Lambda world, Lambda is an Elastic Beanstalk instance, as I'm just trying to describe it. It's not EBS. They're not the same. They're two completely separate services. I'm just trying to get you to understand exactly what Lambda is going to do for you. Lambda is like Elastic Beanstalk, where it is a serverless compute service that's going to allow you to run your custom code within AWS. So suppose you have different functions and automated jobs, and you have different Python scripts, and you have all these different things that you want to run, but you don't have the on-prem resources to run it all the time. You don't want to just have some of your code living on a desktop under your desk all the time. You want to have it available. You want to have it available for other engineers within your organization to be able to run. But you don't want to essentially have that dedicated EC2 instance that's there running it all the time, right? Because don't forget, you're paying for this all the time, right? You're paying for this per hour, and you want to still have these functions available to be run whenever they need to be. You don't want to have to power on the instance and blah, 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 blah. So Lambda gives you the ability to essentially upload your code and have a serverless infrastructure that automatically scales. So what's cool about this is, suppose that I have more need at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Lambda is going to automatically scale what I need in order to run these functions during the day, and it's going to take away some of the resources it adds during the day at night because my scale may be lower. So it's going to automatically scale, and again, we're not going to have to worry about any of the disk, any of the operating system, any of the configuration, etc. All we care about is the code. All we care about is the code that's actually being deployed in our Lambda service, and that's it. So this allows us to either upload that code in a zip file or a container image. Now, what's really cool about Lambda is we can actually upload a container image if we've deployed code, if we've developed some kind of a function or service within a container. We can go ahead and we can upload that container image up to Lambda, and Lambda will go ahead and run it for us. We just need to tell it that it is in fact going to be a container. Now, the other thing that Lambda can do is we can actually have our code kick off over 140 different AWS services. So within Cisco, we kind of do this where when I go through the approval process and I actually get an AWS account from Cisco, Cisco actually has a number of Lambda functions that are run automatically. In other words, I don't control them. So for example, one of the things we do is a password policy. So we actually have a Lambda function that goes in and makes sure that the IAM roles, that the IAM policies are set correctly, and we have the right password policy. We have other Lambda functions that deal with SAML authentication. Right? Or that was supposed to be let me try that again, SAML or SSO, single sign-on, right? So these are Lambda functions where it's custom code from Cisco, right? It's Python code that Cisco has written to go ahead and do these things, but they're running on Lambda servers within AWS, and so we don't control the server, we don't care the server. These are just automated functions that can be kicked off whenever they want to. You can also do things like checking configuration, so check config. And again, these are all internal AWS functions, but they don't necessarily have to be, just giving you an idea of different things that you can do, right? So let's go ahead and let's take a look at what, oh, and by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this. If I did already, I'm absolutely sorry if I mentioned it twice. It'll just make sure you pay attention. You only pay for what you use within Lambda. So let's just say that between 8 to 5 in the afternoon, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., I need more resources. Well, what's going to happen is that Lambda is going to scale those resources. After 5 or before 8, what's going to happen is that Lambda is going to remove those resources, but I'm only going to pay for the scale that I use. So where if you think about EC2, you're paying for that instance every hour. You're paying a certain amount of cents or dollars every hour. With Lambda, I'm going to pay more during peak hours. I'm going to pay less during non-peak hours, because I'm only paying for the actual resources that I'm using. So it's much more cost effective if you're going to just have this code maybe run. It's a batch job that's going to be run once a day during peak hours or something like that. Much easier to use Lambda than have a dedicated resource. So let's head over to our management console. I'm going to go to my recently visited services, click on Lambda, or you can go into compute, by the way. So let me go back to the dashboard here. Underneath compute, you're going to see Lambda, so we can just click on Lambda. Underneath Lambda, it's going to navigate us over to a dashboard here where we're going to see how much storage we're using, how many, what's the currency that we have, full amount concurrency. So how many concurrent instances do we have? What's the throttling? How many error counts, success rate, etc. We're gonna be given some dashboard items here to be able to see what our functions are. Now, if I go to applications, you can see that I did have one here. I'm gonna go ahead and delete it. This was an application that I had previously. I think we're gonna light up the same one again. This was just testing things out. I'm gonna go to dashboard here. We're gonna say create function, and I just want to show you kind of how to do this. So you have a couple of options across the top. If I'm running my own code, I would go ahead and say author from scratch, right? Because this is my code. I would go ahead and give it a name down in the runtime, pretty self-explanatory. I would pick what code I'm going to run, whether that's Python 3.6, 2.7, etc. I can pick some different versions here, Ruby, etc. I can have a custom runtime. This would be if I develop something on Amazon Linux. Down here underneath permissions, this is something that I want you folks to pay attention to, because automatically what Lambda will do is create an IAM role for me with specific permissions, but you may already have one. If you want to go in and do it yourself, again, if you're exploring IAM roles and you want to learn how to do that yourself, you could go over to use an existing role, and then you would go ahead and you would pick whatever role you have. Now you can see that I already have an application called Hello World, and you can see that there's an IAM role that's been created for me already. So I could select that one if I really wanted to. Down in advanced settings here, this is where we would go ahead and we would put in what VPC we wanted to. If we had code signing, we would go ahead and add that as well. So this is if we're going to custom author our code, but you can see I have 3 other options. So the container image, if I have a container that I want to actually upload, I can go ahead and upload that container. I have some advanced options here, same thing as permissions. So I have some options that I can use, but I can upload my container image. Then I have use as a blueprint. This is kind of cool because I can have different foundational codes that Amazon is going to give me that I can work off of. So there may be some things where I want to change different configuration roles, or I may want to have different Microsoft services running in the cloud. I can go ahead and I can use some of these foundational scripts and some of these foundational code principles in whatever it is that I'm writing, and I can just work off of what they already have. Or I can browse a serverless application that's already been built for me. So, I have Hello World Python 3. I have Hello World. I think this is the one that I demoed first just to make sure that everything was going to go correctly. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick Hello World Python 3. So you can see here that this kind of automatically fills out everything for me. So if I click the drop down here, I have the template. This is actually the GitHub repository that's going to grab this code. So if I wanted to go there and look at it, I could. These are the permissions that it's going to automatically create for me. So it's letting me know what the role is and what the identity that it's going to create for me. And then, of course, the license. Everybody reads the license file. Make sure you read it. The last thing we need to do, though, is we do need to give it the identity name parameter. I'm just going to copy and paste the app name and the identity name just to make sure they're consistent. And I'm going to go ahead and say deploy. Now, what this is going to do is this is going to automatically deploy this code for me. I'm not going to have to do anything. So once it's done deploying, it brings me to that application. So it says getting started. This is where I can see my deployment environment. I can see we're using AWS Cloud 9. I can see Visual Studio. I can see the different components that make up this particular app. I can come down here. I can click on the logical ID. This will open up the IAM console to show me that IAM role that was created for me. And that's really important for you to know, right? So this is the actual ID in the IAM roles that was created for me. So when I click on that role, it brings me over to the management console and it shows me that ID. If I were to delete this application, I may want to also go and delete this role. So that's just something to be aware of. I can go over here and click on deployments. It shows me that app that was deployed. And so now I have a hello world Lambda function that's essentially been kicked off and it's running in Python. So again, lets me know the errors and things like that. So I can see the different applications that I have running. Again, we just deployed some sample code just to show you how it works. I mean, it's hello world. It's we're not reinventing the wheel here. The idea is that I want you guys to understand that Lambda is a perfect resource for you to leverage if you have some of those custom code options. If you're going to write different automated apps, like I said, such as checking the password, single sign-on, things along those lines, you can use Lambda for those automated functions. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. We'll see you guys in the next one.